A drone armed with a warhead hit the outer protective shell of Ukraine's Chernobyl nuclear plant early Friday, damaging the structure and briefly starting a fire, in an attack Kyiv blamed on Russia. The Kremlin denied it was responsible. According to Associated Press, radiation levels at the shuttered plant in the Kyiv region, site of the world's worst nuclear accident, have not increased, according to the UN International Atomic Energy Agency, which said the strike did not breach the plant's inner containment shell. The IAEA did not attribute blame, saying only that its team stationed at the site heard an explosion and was informed that a drone had struck the shell. Fighting around nuclear power plants has repeatedly raised fears of a nuclear catastrophe during 3 years of war, particularly in a country where many vividly remember living through the 1986 Chernobyl disaster, which killed at least 30 people and spewed radioactive fallout over much of the northern hemisphere. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is Europe's biggest, has occasionally been hit by drones during the war without causing significant damage. The strike came 2 days after President Donald Trump upended U.S. policy on Ukraine, saying he would meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin to discuss ending the war. The move seemed to identify Putin as the only player that matters and looked set to sideline Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, as well as European governments, in any peace talks. That comes at a time when Ukraine is being slowly pushed backward by Russia's bigger army along parts of the 1,000-kilometer, 600-mile, front line and desperately needs more Western help. The Chernobyl strike occurred in the early hours of Friday, according to the IAEA. Zelensky said a Russian drone with a high-explosive warhead hit the plant's outer shell and started a fire, which has been put out.
If Ukraine were to hypothetically receive the best American fighter jet F-35, Ukrainian aviation could act as an offensive force, not just a defensive one. This is what former U.S. Army officer and military analyst Brent Eastwood writes on the pages of 1945. He noted that the Ukrainian military aviation showed itself well in the war with the Russian Federation, but the Ukrainians have never dominated the air. The expert believes that the main reason for this is the obsolescence of the aircraft that the Ukrainian armed forces have in service. Even the F-16s received from partners are old versions that cannot fire modern long-range missiles. Therefore, they are mainly effective only against enemy drones and missiles, the analyst says. In order for the Ukrainian Air Force to be able to play offensively and not just defensively, they need significantly more modern aircraft. For example, the best serial fighter of the US, which is supplied to allies as well, the F-35. Of course, obtaining such aircraft would be a difficult task, not to mention the need for extensive retraining of pilots, ground personnel and airfield infrastructure. F-35s in Ukraine would certainly anger the Russians. They would view these aircraft as a threat that could tip the balance in the air war. So if Volodymyr Zelensky wants to start peace talks soon, the announcement of the F-35 purchase would hinder these efforts, the analyst writes. In his opinion, in any case, the Ukrainians would hardly have time to send the F-35 into battle. The war would most likely end earlier. However, these aircraft could strengthen the Ukrainian Air Force, which will patrol the demilitarized zone after the signing of peace. If the F-35s had theoretically made it to this war, one of the main concerns would have been the potential loss of this very expensive aircraft in combat. That would have been a disaster, the analyst writes. The author of the article is convinced that Russia would launch a major PR campaign, inflating its victory over the F-35. Even worse, if the wreckage of the plane fell into the hands of the Russians and they got the opportunity to study the latest American technology. The F-35 Lightning II is a fifth-generation multi-role fighter aircraft developed by the American company Lockheed Martin in cooperation with several NATO countries. It is one of the most advanced combat aircraft in the world, designed to gain air superiority, strike ground targets, conduct reconnaissance, and perform special missions. It is known as a representative of the stealth generation of American aircraft. The aircraft is often criticized for its incredible cost, which reaches $100 million per unit, and the difficulty of maintenance. In particular, Elon Musk has criticized the F-35, calling these aircraft too expensive and morally obsolete in the era of drones.